Hello students! As we go through our documents today, we're going to be trying to determine how the Islamic Empire spread so quickly. And we're going to be looking at a time range here that's about 130 years, from 622 to 750 CE. And keep in mind, when you see this date CE, this stands for Common Era, it effectively is the same as AD, it's just placing it in a non-Christian term. So AD, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, or in some of our newer sources, we'll also see CE, which is Common Era. So we see Arabia at the dawn of Islam, right? So Muhammad is starting to preach and teach right around 622. He leads a small group of followers in Arabia. Arabia was home of competing tribes. So what we'll see during the life of Muhammad is that Arabia really becomes unified under the religion of Islam and becomes more of a unified country or kingdom, civilization by the end of Muhammad's life. And no longer is it a bunch of competing tribes with one another. In fact, by 750 CE, the Islamic civilization stretched across the Middle East, North Africa, and into Spain. And this was the largest empire up to this point, even larger than the Roman civilization. So more than twice that size. And we see this map here comparing these two civilizations. So on the map, we have the Roman Empire. This is right around its height, close to the year 117 CE or AD. And what we see is all this territory in green is that of the Roman civilization at the time. So a huge chunk of Europe going all the way up into what becomes England or Britain. The coast of North Africa is under the control of the Romans, and then pushing into this similar area as the original Holy Land where Judaism and Christianity are getting their beginnings here. So this would be in the area of modern day Israel and pushing into the Middle East and Asia Minor, Turkey here. So although it's not exactly the same area, as you can see here, the massive size of the Islamic civilization by the year 750. So all of Arabia, of course, and that's accomplished by the end of Muhammad's life. A huge chunk of North Africa, and these are much more broader than what was controlled by the Romans. And even pushing into Europe. So we can see here as we look at Spain. Spain is actually controlled by Muslims throughout vast stretches of centuries during the Middle Ages, and pushing east even further into Asia. This is a very massive amount of land. It's much larger if you just compare the square miles than that of the Roman civilization. And it's actually something that the Islamic civilization spreads very, very quickly. So although 130 years might seem like a long time, it's actually a really, really short time when we're putting in the context of a civilization. So as we go through our documents here, we're going to be focusing on this central question. How did the Islamic civilization, the empire, expand? So what's the method? How is this occurring so quickly? This map is actually very helpful. And as we refer to some of the questions, thinking about this map will assist us. And it's color coded here, so we can kind of get a sense at what period during that 130 years was territory being added to the civilization. So in this dark peach color here, we have the civilization under Muhammad from 622 to 632. 632 is going to be the year where Muhammad dies. So we can see all of Arabia is unified by the end of Muhammad's life. But obviously we know that this is spreading out to vast territories. So the caliphate that follows the life of Muhammad, we have the Rashidun Caliphate. And this is roughly, it's close to a 30-year period, 632 to 661. And we can see that during that territory, this medium peach color here is added. So pushing all the way up Israel, pushing across into large swatches of Egypt here, modern day Iraq, Iran, pushing eastward here. And we can see that this is adding a huge, vast amount of territory in a relatively short period of time. And then the caliphate that follows, the Umayyad Caliphate from 661 to 750, we can see that that's shown in this kind of a beige color here. So pushing west across North Africa into the majority of modern day Spain and Portugal, and then pushing further eastward. So again, this map gives us a breakdown more by dates when these territories are being added. So again, We're considering how is it that the Islamic Empire expanded. That's a question we want to keep at the forefront of our mind as we go through the documents. Let's take a look. We're getting ready here to look at the documents concerning how it is that the Islamic civilization spread so quickly after the death of Muhammad. But actually, before we look at any of the documents, take a look at the written portions here. We are actually asked to make a series of hypotheses. So a hypothesis is like an idea, a suspected answer, even though you're not 100% sure. So even though you don't have as much evidence as you would want to make a really strong determination based on what you know, it's what you think is the likely answer, the likely explanation. So as we look at the graphic organizer, the written response portion says, after examining the map on Islamic expansion, make a hypothesis for the following question: how did the Islamic Empire expand? So in this area here, based on the last map, so the last slide in the PowerPoint presentation that was in the introduction of the video, so you can go back and take a look at it, but based solely on that, make a hypothesis as to how did the Islamic Empire expand. So go ahead and pause the video and do that. Now let's take a look at document A. So the Battle of Yarmouk. So I'm going to be asked for the sourcing information, close reading, why was the fiercest and bloodiest kind? Do you think it's reliable? So reliable. Do I think the source is a believable source? So, and for determining how the Islamic Empire expanded in the 7th and 8th centuries, why or why not? So do I think it's credible? Do I trust the source? And one of the things that we want to consider when we examine how reliable a source is do we feel like the source has bias? So if a source has bias, it means that the author has a reason to present things a certain way. All right, let's take a look at document A. We have here our sourcing information at the top. So our sourcing information is going to be focusing on who created the document, when the document was created, what type of document it is, what's the purpose of the document. These are all things that are important to consider when we look at the sourcing information. Muslim forces took control of Syria in 636 CE when they fought the Eastern Roman Empire, which included Greece, at the Battle of Yarmouk. This account, written by Muslim historian Ahmad al-Biladuri in the 800 CE, describes the battle. Okay, so although the document is a very old document, it is technically a secondary source because it is still written well after the event. So the author would not have witnessed the event firsthand. So I want to consider here my sourcing information. So this is including the author. The author is particularly important. Ahmad al-Biladuri, he's a historian, a Muslim historian. He's writing in the 800s CE, and he's describing the battle. So the purpose is describing the battle. The author is a historian. It's a secondary source. It's written several hundred years after the event took place. So when I consider the reliability of the source, number one, I'll look at the fact that Ahmad al-Biladuri is a historian. So that tends to suggest that it would probably be credible because it implies that he has background and knowledge regarding the event. He is Muslim, so I do want to consider that if he's portraying Muslims in a positive way, he has a reason maybe to do that. He has a little bit of bias, so it is important to consider that as well. And he's describing the Battle of Yarmouk. So this is all connected to the sourcing information. The Muslims gathered together and the Greek army marched against them. The Greeks and their followers in this battle tied themselves to each other by chains so that none of them would run away. All right, this stands out to me as being really important, really interesting. All right, it seems like the Greeks aren't super confident if they think their soldiers are likely to run away, and this seems like a pretty desperate measure. The battle they fought at Al-Yarmouk was of the fiercest and bloodiest kind. In this battle, 24,000 Muslims took part. By Allah's help, some 70,000 of them, the Greeks, were put to death, and their remnants took to flight. Flight meaning that they're running away. Reaching as far as Palestine, Antioch,
Aleppo, Mesopotamia, and Armenia. In the Battle of Al Yarmouk, certain Muslim women took part and fought violently. Among them was Hind, daughter of Utbah and mother of Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, who repeatedly exclaimed, "Cut the arms of these non-Muslims with your swords." So taking this in and considering the source here and recognizing what we're being asked to respond with, we want to highlight some information from the source that is explaining why the battle was so fierce and bloody. Right, so if I go back to the written part, I know I'm going to be asked that. List 3 reasons why the battle was the fiercest and bloodiest kind. So go ahead and pause the video. What I'd like you to do is highlight some evidence, some examples of why the battle was fierce and bloody, and then we'll take a look at it together. So looking at this, I think the part where it explains that the Greeks are chaining themselves together greatly explains why the battle is going to be fierce and bloody. The fact that they're unable to maneuver as an army probably should be able to because they're chained together. It also shows a lack of confidence. Maybe the soldiers aren't particularly trained, aren't well equipped. They're nervous, they're not experienced, they're not disciplined. These are all reasons why you might consider doing such a drastic thing as chaining the soldiers together. So that strikes me as really critical. And when they try to run away, they're not going to be able to, which is going to add to the intensity and the severity of the battle. We see lots of people taking part, right? So we're talking about tens of thousands of people. It's interesting that the Muslims seem to be heavily outnumbered. 24,000, 70,000 of the Greeks were put to death. The remnants took to flight, so they tried to run away, reaching as far as Palestine, Antioch, Mesopotamia, and Armenia. We might also highlight the fact that it seems to be being fought with a lot of fervor and passion, right? When we look at the quote, "Cut the arms of these non-Muslims with your swords." So we see here the chaining together, the large number of participants, and the ferocity of which they're fighting based on this particular quote. I think these are all great things to look at as we consider why the bloody nature of this particular battle. So I'd like you to pause it here. I'd actually like you to go back to document A, the response portion. You're going to explain the sourcing information. So who was al-Baladuri? And why do you think he wrote this document? So this is highlighting the purpose. The close reading lists 3 reasons why this battle was the fiercest and bloodiest kind. So now we've done our highlighting, so this should be relatively easy. And do we consider it to be a reliable source? And there's not necessarily a right answer, but you need to justify your answer, right? You need to explain why it is that you feel that way. So it's okay to say that it's reliable, but you should be able to explain it. If you're saying it's reliable, you're probably focusing on his profession and his expertise within that profession. If you're questioning the reliability, you might point out that he is Muslim and he seems to be portraying the Muslims in like this victorious, kind of dominant in their victory kind of a way. So that he might have a reason to want to portray them as being more capable in battle than they might have been. But there's not necessarily one right answer as long as you are explaining why you feel that way is really important. So all of these should definitely be complete sentences, complete thoughts. And then finally, now with just document A, we haven't looked at the other documents yet, we're going to be creating another hypothesis. So now based on not only the map, but document A, what's our new hypothesis? So go ahead and pause and finish all this response for document A. Looking at document B here, the first thing again we want to pick up on is our sourcing information. So we have a treaty of Tudmir in 713. So this is going to be a primary source created by people who experienced this event, experienced this time period. The treaty was signed in 713 CE between Abd al-Aziz, the commander of the Muslim forces invading Spain, and Theodemir, the Christian king of a region in southern Spain. Okay. So What is the document? The document is a treaty. So identifying what the document is really important. And it is created between Abd al-Aziz, who's the commander of the Muslim forces invading Spain, and the Christian king Theodemir. So based on our maps and everything that we've seen, we know that Theodemir is probably on the losing side. It seems like, based on the map, that the Islamic civilization is expanding into Theodemir's territory. So the purpose of a treaty is usually to resolve conflict and to reach an agreement as to how things are going to be done moving forward. All right, let's take a look at the arrangement here. In the name of God, the merciful and compassionate, we, Abd al-Aziz's forces, will not harass him, Theodemir, nor remove him from power. His followers will not be killed or taken prisoner, nor will they be separated from their women and children. They will not be coerced in matters of religion. Their churches will not be burned, nor will sacred objects be taken from the realm, as long as he remains sincere and fulfills these conditions that we have set for him. He will not give shelter to fugitives, nor to our enemies, nor encourage any protected person to fear us, nor conceal any news of our enemies. He and each of his men shall also pay 1 dinar every year, together with 4 measures of wheat, 4 measures of barley, 4 liquid measures of concentrated fruit juice, 4 liquid measures of vinegar, 4 of honey, and 4 of olive oil. Slaves must each pay half of this amount. So I'd like to pause the video here. I want you to highlight from the treaty, according to this document, this primary source document, how will Muslims treat conquered people? How will Muslims treat conquered people? Some of the vocabulary word coerced is like being forced to. Sacred is like a very holy object. Fugitives are like people running from the law or criminals. Protected persons, people who would be kept safe, under protection from the government. Conceal is to hide. All right, so go ahead and pause it and make those highlights, please. All right, so hopefully we highlighted areas here all the way up to the word him. So starting with we, Abd al-Aziz's forces, and going all the way to this middle. This here is the bulk of what the Muslims are agreeing to do, how they're going to treat conquered people here. So as we are responding to that, we want to focus on this section, right? When we're considering how the Muslims are going to treat conquered people according to this document. So they're not going to harass Theodemir, the king. Harass means to like bully, threaten, attack. Nor are they going to remove him from power. So he's going to retain that position as king, kind of a subservient king, obviously, but he's going to retain that position, that title, that influence. His followers will not be killed or taken prisoner. Okay, so his people won't be killed or taken prisoner. Nor will they be separated from their women and children. They will not be coerced in the matters of religion. So they're going to be allowed to continue to practice Christianity or whatever religion they desire. Right, so they're not going to be forced to convert to Islam. Their churches will not be burned, nor will sacred objects be taken from the realm, as long as he remains sincere and fulfills these conditions that we have set for him. So we actually see some really different documents here, right, between documents A and B so far. And one is really, really harsh, and this one seems a little friendlier in nature, right? This is much more of a agreeable terms, showing mercy, right? Not killing everyone by the thousands, not taking people. The terms here of this treaty are pretty favorable, probably the best that a conquered people could really hope for. So it's interesting in that regard. Take a look at the written part here for document B. So what we're going to focus on now. So the sourcing information, what is the document? It's a treaty. What's its purpose? What's the purpose of a treaty? To establish terms to end conflict or war. So we should have a complete sentence here. Should note the creators of the treaty as well. Okay, we highlighted this. How will Muslims, according to this document, treat the conquered peoples? Corroboration. Corroboration is all about kind of compare and contrast. You're looking at multiple pieces of evidence and seeing, do they suggest the same thing, right? If they do, they're corroborating each other. Do they say opposite things? If that's the case, then they're not corroborating one another. So how is the account of Muslim expansion in document B similar or different from the account of document A? Should have several sentences here. Do you think this document is a reliable source for determining how the Islamic Empire expanded in the 7th and 8th centuries? Why or why not? So again, reliability. Do we think it's a believable source? Do we think it's a credible source? And then stating why or why not. And then finally, using the map, using document A and document B, we now have multiple pieces of the puzzle. We're going to create a third hypothesis. How did the Islamic Empire expand? Do that here. Go and pause the video. I'd like you to respond to document B, please. Let us turn our attention over here to document C. Our sourcing information is going to be at the top. We also have a blurb here. So the author is going to be Fred Donner. It's from a work that he created, The Early Islamic Conquest. It's written in 1981, so obviously we're dealing with a secondary source created well after the events that we're looking at. Some vocabulary we'll encounter in the source. Institutionalized means established as part of the government. Stipends refer to payment. Regime, government and power, and nobles are the ruling class. Let's take a look at our more detailed sourcing information here at the top. Fred Donner is a historian at the University of Chicago who specializes in early Islam and Islamic expansion. Below is an excerpt from his book where he challenges some of the common knowledge about early Islamic conquest. All right, so who is the author? It's Fred Donner. He's a historian. He's at the University of Chicago, and he is writing a book. So the purpose of the book is to convey historical information. And he is challenging some former ideas here. During the conquest period, the granting of gifts, which had been practiced by Muhammad, became more regularized and eventually institutionalized. In the first place, there was established a system of stipends or direct salary payments to warriors serving in the Islamic armies. Tribesmen in the Islamic armies who rebelled against the regime now did so at the cost of losing the stipends that the regime provided. Similarly, stipends were granted to some Persian or Armenian nobles who cooperated with the Muslims in Iraq. In most cases, it appears that these individuals were required to embrace Islam in order to receive their stipend. So one of the things we want to consider is we look at these stipends. So stipend is like it's like a payment of money. Okay, so stipend essentially is referring to money. So if somebody asks, is a position stipend? It means, is it a paid position? Are you getting money for doing it? And what's the purpose, right? What's the purpose of these payments? So go ahead and pause the video. I'd like you to highlight areas here that might help you draw a conclusion as to what the purpose of these payments are. Taking a look at it together here, Fred Donner suggests that the payment of these stipends made it less likely that people would rebel, go against the authority of the regime of the government of the Islamic civilization. In most cases, it appears that these individuals were required to embrace Islam in order to receive their stipend. So I think the purpose also is probably to convert people. So if you know you're going to get money for converting, that might be an incentive for doing so. And then in addition to that, tribesmen in Islamic armies who rebelled against the regime now did so at the cost of losing the stipend. So I think if you're going to summarize the purpose here in just a couple of terms, you might say conversion, right? Getting people to become Islamic. And you might also point out loyalty, right? Because you're getting this money as a form of payment, and you know if you rebel, if you go against the authority of those who are in charge, that you're risking losing that stipend. You're almost certainly going to lose that stipend, in fact. So you have loyalty and conversion seems to be the crux of the purpose as we consider that. But you're going to need to articulate these ideas in more detail. Let's take a look at the written response for document C. So what type of document is this? It's a secondary source. It's a book about history, specifically the early Islamic period. It's written by Fred Donner, and he is a professor. What's his purpose? What's the purpose of a history book? Right, to teach about history, to convey knowledge about a topic. All right, so we identified the purpose of the gift giving there. Corroboration, so this is important. How is this account of Muslim expansion in document C different from the accounts in documents A and B? And they are actually pretty different. There's some corroboration maybe between two of the three documents, and one of the documents is really standing out on its own as being unlike the other two. So hopefully you're able to determine which one is which. But of the three documents, two of them are seeming to corroborate, and one of them is presenting an opposite viewpoint. Do you think this document is a reliable source for determining how the Islamic Empire expanded? So again, questioning the reliability. Do you think it's a believable document? And again, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer here. All documents are going to have some flaws. All documents are going to have some reason why you might question the accuracy of the document. But how trustworthy do you think the document is? And explaining why or why not. This is the critical one here. This is the critical part, is your explanation as to why or why not. Now we have the map, we have document A, document B, and document C. We're going to create our fourth hypothesis. How did the Islamic Empire expand? So hopefully as we're getting more and more pieces of the puzzle, we're getting a more refined, more thoughtful hypothesis. And then we have our last written response, the final claim here. We're going to have a nice hearty paragraph here. Based on the three documents you looked at, write a paragraph to answer the following question: how did the Islamic Empire expand? Make sure to include evidence from at least two different documents. So a minimum of two different documents that you're referring to. If you want to quote from the documents directly, you can. Just put in quotation marks, as stated in document A, or B or C, whichever ones seem the most applicable to your response. But a nice hearty paragraph here, and that will complete this assignment. So hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully you enjoyed the process. Bye for now.